Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Rekindling the Legacy podcast. I'm Professor Andrew Davis.
And I'm Dr. Juhi Gupta, and together we are here to retell the stories of some of the heroic women who fought for their freedom against all the odds and made India the nation it is today.
We are coming to you today courtesy of the Inclusive Futures Foundation. You can find out more about us online on our website at theinclusivefuturesfoundation.com. But we are an Indian-based NGO that is working with women and children's rights, on the environment, with healthcare, with education, and with projects around culture, seeking to make sure that we work together to build bonds across society and make the world a better place. Do check out our website to find out more about what we do when you have the moment.
Today we are sharing a story that will absolutely break your heart and then inspire you beyond measure. It's about a woman whose defining moment came on one of the most tragic days of her life. We are talking about Tara Rani Srivastava, a freedom fighter from Bihar whose story encapsulates everything about courage, sacrifice, and the price of independence.
Tara Rani Srivastava was born near Patna in Bihar in a place called Saran. She was born into a modest household. We don't have her exact birth date, but we do know that, like many women of the era, she was married very young, at the age of just 13. Her husband was Phulendu Srivastava, and he was already an emerging freedom fighter in Bihar. But here's something beautiful. Instead of her youth and this arranged marriage limiting her, it actually became the catalyst for her awakening as a revolutionary.
Right, because Phulendu was completely devoted to the cause of Indian independence, and Tara Rani became deeply inspired by his passion. But what's remarkable is that she didn't just support him from the sidelines. She became an active leader herself. And this was during a time when women weren't even allowed to step out of their houses without permission, Andrew. Yet, here was this young woman leading protests and rallies against British rule. She was heavily influenced by Mahatma Gandhi, particularly his message about women's empowerment and the upliftment of Harijans, the oppressed community. Gandhi's philosophy of non-violent resistance rally shaped her approach to activism.
And she was very actively involved in some of the major movements that Gandhi had led the people of India through as well. So during the non-cooperation movement in the 1920s, she was actively encouraging people to boycott foreign clothes and use khadi, Indian hand-spun cloth, instead. That might sound very simplistic to us, but actually in the context of the time, choosing to wear Indian-made clothes over British-made ones was a really powerful act of defiance. It symbolized economic resistance and cultural pride.
But her most significant moment came during the Quit India movement. It was a campaign that Mahatma Gandhi launched on August 8, 1942, with the slogan Angrezo Bharat Chhoro, Quit India. Gandhi specifically called upon Tara Rani and Phulendu to join this movement. And on August 12, 1942, just 4 days later, the couple gathered 4,000 men and women from their village and led a massive march in Siwan city in Bihar. This wasn't just a spontaneous gathering, this was a carefully planned act of mass civil disobedience. And their goal was both symbolic and deeply provocative. They wanted to hoist the Indian tricolor flag on the roof of the Siwan police station.
In 1942, that would have been considered an act of open rebellion against the British government. The British authorities saw this massive crowd approaching the police station, and their response was immediate and violent. They ordered a lathi charge, that's a coordinated charge with heavy wooden sticks and batons. But the crowd that was facing them was just too large and too determined. Unable to control 4,000 protesters with just batons, the police made a decision that would change Tara Rani's life forever. They opened fire on the crowd. Phulendu, Tara Rani's husband, was struck by a bullet and seriously injured in the firing.
Now imagine this moment. You're a young woman. You're just seen your husband shot by police. There's chaos all around you, and you have a choice to make. Do you abandon your mission to care for your wounded husband, or do you continue forward? Tara Rani made a choice that defines heroism. She tore off a piece of her own sari to bandage her husband's wounds, and then she continued marching towards the police station. She left her injured husband in the care of others and kept moving forward because the mission was bigger than any individual, even someone she loved deeply.
At the head of the crowd, she reached the police station and they succeeded in hoisting the Indian tricolour flag. She'd accomplished what she and her husband had set out to do, but when she returned to him, Phulendu had died from his injuries. This man who had inspired her to join the freedom movement, who had been her partner in this struggle, was gone. At this point, she was probably around 30 years old, maybe a little bit younger, and she had just become a widow in the most traumatic circumstances imaginable. Her husband had died for the cause that they both believed in.
But here's what separates extraordinary people from ordinary ones: her response to this tragedy. During Phulendu's funeral, she was the one providing comfort to others. She was the strong one, the one holding everybody else together. 3 days later, on August 15, 1942, there was a prayer service in Chhapra to honor Phulendu's sacrifice and contributions to the freedom struggle. And here's one of the most beautiful historical coincidences. Exactly 5 years later, on August 15, 1947, when India gained its independence, the date of that memorial service became Independence Day.
After her husband's death, Tara Rani could have retreated from public life. She was then a young widow from just a modest background with no independent wealth or family support system. And yet instead she continued leading protests and rallies right up until 1947. For 5 more years after losing her husband, she kept fighting for the dream that they'd shared together. I think one of the things that makes her story so powerful is that it tells us of the sacrifice of ordinary people. She wasn't from a wealthy family. She wasn't highly educated or have big political connections. Tara Rani Srivastava was just a young woman who believed passionately in freedom.
And she was fighting on multiple fronts, wasn't she? Not just against British colonialism, but against the gender inequalities of her own society. Women like her were pioneers who showed that courage and leadership were not limited by gender. In an era where women were expected to remain in the domestic sphere, she was leading thousands of people in acts of civil disobedience. She was redefining what was possible for women in Indian society.
The independence movement is often told through the stories of famous male leaders from major urban centres. But the real movement was made up of thousands of people like Tara Rani in small towns and villages across India. For decades after independence, stories like hers were not widely known or celebrated. But that is now changing, thankfully. As recently as November 2020, India's Vice President M. Venkaiah Naidu used Facebook to honour Tara Rani and specifically urged that her story needed to be included in some of the history textbooks.
I think there's something profound about the image that defines her story. Tearing her sari to bandage her husband's wounds and then continuing to march towards her goal. It's such a perfect metaphor for resilience. So, like we always conclude our biographies by asking and answering this question, that what was her legacy? What difference did her life make? What are the lessons that we can learn from her? So, Andrew, what would you say about Tara Rani Srivastava?
Gee, I think Tara Rani's story teaches us that heroism isn't about being fearless. It's about acting and continuing to move forward despite your fear and despite your pain. She must have been terrified and heartbroken on that day, but she kept moving forward. And there's something powerful about how she transformed her personal tragedy into continued service. Instead of letting grief consume her, as many would have done, she used that grief as a fuel to keep fighting for the cause. I think her story also shows us that change requires sacrifice from ordinary people and not just the famous, prominent leaders. The freedom movement succeeded because thousands of people like Tara Rani were willing to risk everything. I also think there's a lesson here about how we remember history. For too long, stories like Tara Rani's were marginalised or forgotten entirely. We have a responsibility to seek out and honour those overlooked heroes. Because every time we uncover a story like Tara Rani's, we're not just learning about the past, we're also expanding our understanding of what courage looks like and what ordinary people are capable of achieving.
And as we wrap up today's episode, I want to leave our listeners with this thought. Somewhere in your own community, there are probably people whose quiet acts of courage are shaping the future, just like Tara Rani. Her legacy reminds us that the most powerful revolutions often begin with ordinary people making extraordinary choices in moments of crisis. So thank you for joining us today to learn about a woman who kept the tricolor flying even in her darkest hour.
And if this story moved you as much as it moved us, then please share this episode and help us honour the memory of heroes like Tara Rani Srivastava. We hope that you'll join us again for our next episode and learn another story of another remarkable Indian woman freedom fighter. To make sure you don't miss out, do please subscribe to our channel and like this episode. And we'll look forward to seeing you again very soon.